It was the kind of silence that feels unnatural. The birds had stopped singing. The breeze barely moved the heavy pine branches, and in the stillness that cloaked the rural Texas landscape, something was deeply, terribly wrong. Canyon County, just outside of Amarillo, is the kind of place where folks greet each other by name at the gas station, where Friday night football is practically religion, and where news, when it comes, is rarely more serious than a livestock auction or a bake sale mishap. So when sheriff's deputies were dispatched to the home of Gregory Lawson, a single father living in a modest farmhouse 10 miles outside town, the idea that anything truly sinister was about to unfold was the farthest thing from their minds. Emily Grace Lawson, 7 years old, hadn't been in school for nearly 2 weeks. At first, it was easy to assume she was sick, perhaps a stomach bug, maybe the flu. But then excuses became silence. No doctor's note. No return calls. And then, nothing. It was a school counselor, Rebecca Allen, who made the final call to authorities. She was a gentle, soft-spoken child, Allen recalled. If Emily missed school, we noticed. But after 10 days, it just didn't sit right. When deputies arrived at the Lawson home, they were met with a chilling contradiction. The front porch was swept clean. A rocking chair swayed slightly in the wind, and the windows were unbroken and curtained neatly. Nothing outwardly signaled that the house was a crime scene. But what happened next will haunt even the most seasoned officers. According to body cam footage later reviewed during the investigation, Gregory Lawson answered the door with an eerie calmness. He smiled. He offered us coffee, one deputy said. Then, without any prompting, he turned and walked us straight to the room where Emily lay. The room had been stripped of ordinary function. No toys. No furniture save for a small table and a single wooden chair. Emily's body was wrapped tightly in a white blanket, her face exposed, eyes closed as though asleep. Around her were burned-down candles, chalk-drawn symbols on the floor, arcane, unfamiliar, and arranged with care. Lawson sat on the floor beside her, mumbling to himself. When the deputies attempted to remove him from the scene, he didn't resist. He simply said, "It's okay now. The darkness is gone. She'll wake up soon." In the days that followed, the town struggled to make sense of the loss. Emily Grace Lawson had been, by all accounts, a joyful child. Her teachers described her as quiet but imaginative, always drawing animals, especially birds and foxes, in bright-colored chalk during recess. She loved the school's guinea pigs and often asked if she could take them home for the weekend. There were no prior reports of abuse, no calls to Child Protective Services, no red flags. Her mother, Catherine Miller, had died in a car accident when Emily was just 3. Since then, Lawson had raised Emily alone, occasionally relying on his elderly parents who lived in a neighboring county. He was a man of few words, worked odd jobs, and mostly kept to himself. But no one had suspected he harbored dangerous beliefs or mental instability. He was always quiet, polite, said neighbor Judith Harrelson. We'd hear music sometimes, gospel stuff. Then recently it was different, chanting, strange rhythms. We thought maybe he'd join one of those new churches or something. In custody, Gregory Lawson began to explain what he had done. His words were both rambling and deliberate, at times tearful, at others strangely triumphant. He believed Emily had been possessed by what he called a dark tether, a force he claimed had attached to her soul after she began seeing things in the woods behind their house. According to his statement, Emily had told him of a tall woman with no face who came at night and stood by her window. At first, Lawson thought it was nightmares. But when Emily began drawing the woman in her school notebooks and refusing to sleep, he became convinced the evil was real. He stopped taking her to church, saying the local pastor couldn't see the truth. Instead, he began researching rituals online, some rooted in folk Christianity, others in obscure spiritual traditions. Over weeks, his journals filled with sketches of protective sigils, numerological charts, and handwritten prayers of expulsion. Then, sometime between March 12th and March 14th, he performed a ritual he believed would save her. The medical examiner would later confirm that Emily had died of suffocation, likely as Lawson held her down during the ceremony. In the sheriff's press conference, one moment stood out. He truly believed, Sheriff Dana Miller said. He believed she'd rise again once the darkness was removed. He said he had faith. This wasn't a man trying to escape justice. There was no attempt to flee, no effort to hide her body. He left the house open, her room lit with candles, her body laid out as if in reverence. Defense attorney Kendall Rivers, though not affiliated with the case, explained, "These are classic signs of psychotic break. He wasn't trying to get away with murder. He thought he was performing an act of salvation." In psychiatric interviews, Lawson alternated between lucid statements and references to divine whispers and celestial signs. He maintained that Emily had been chosen and that the cleansing had been necessary. He even described the moment she died as the spirit finally leaving. But he never admitted to wrongdoing, only to divine duty. Canyon County isn't the kind of place that talks much about mental illness. But in the wake of Emily's death, the town was forced to confront questions it had long buried. Church leaders issued joint statements condemning the ritual, while also offering prayers for both Lawson and the grieving community. Emily's elementary school set up a mural in her memory, letting students add hand-drawn animals and messages of love. Her teacher, Mrs. Laurel Coates, wept during an on-camera interview. "She told me once she wanted to be a vet because she liked helping little things feel better." That's who Emily was. But beneath the public mourning was a ripple of fear. Parents questioned how a child could vanish for 2 weeks without more urgent response. The school district launched a review of its absence protocols. The local sheriff's office increased training on signs of psychological instability and ritualistic behavior. The question lingered. Could this have been prevented? When investigators returned to the Lawson home with a warrant, they meticulously documented the interior. What they found supported their growing theory, that this was not an act of rage, but of delusion. In Gregory Lawson's bedroom, stacks of handwritten journals filled every drawer. Pages were covered in scrawled notes, some in English, others in what experts later said appeared to be constructed script, resembling symbols pulled from esoteric spiritual traditions. He had drawn intricate diagrams, some resembling protective wards, others referencing numerology, biblical angels, and even modern pseudoscience about energy parasites. One page read, "The girl must be still. The breath carries a demon. Hold, until it flees." Another reads simply, "The host must sleep before resurrection." Authorities also discovered multiple books ordered online, ranging from mainstream theology to occult manuals with titles like Spiritual Armor in the Age of Demons and The Dark Mirror Within, Breaking Curses with Sacred Fire. They also recovered a voice recorder. In the final 2 entries, Lawson's voice is low, deliberate, and calm. "She cries when I speak the words, but the light tells me not to stop. I saw her eyes go white. That means it's almost done." The second recording ends with faint sobs and one chilling whisper, "Don't be afraid, Emmy. Daddy's making it go away." 2 weeks after his arrest, Gregory Lawson was placed under suicide watch. He reportedly refused food for several days, asking instead for ashes and blessed oil. When approached by staff, he muttered about a waiting spirit and asked whether Emily had awakened yet. Psychiatrist Dr. Martin Haywood, assigned to conduct Lawson's competency evaluation, released a preliminary report stating the suspect displayed acute psychotic symptoms with delusional religious ideation. Haywood noted Lawson's detached effect, but also described him as articulate, even persuasive, when discussing his belief system. "He doesn't appear to suffer from hallucinations in the classic sense," Haywood wrote. "Rather, his reality is structured around deeply spiritual frameworks that justify extreme acts." The court placed Lawson in a state-run psychiatric facility for 90 days to determine whether his condition could stabilize. If deemed competent afterward, he would stand trial. The community's frustration deepened. Some residents viewed the psychiatric placement as a delay of justice. Others began to ask harder questions. Had Gregory been showing signs long before tragedy? And if so, why hadn't anyone intervened? In interviews with family members, a timeline began to emerge. Gregory had reportedly withdrawn from most social contact in the year leading up to Emily's death. He had lost steady work at a metal fabrication plant due to erratic attendance and paranoid behavior. He'd begun homeschooling Emily for short periods, claiming the local school exposed her to energetic pollution. His parents, now in their 70s, admitted they had grown concerned. He talked about seeing patterns in clouds, symbols in the grass. His mother said, "We thought it was stress." Losing Kathy broke him. But we didn't think he'd ever harm Emily. But Gregory's dissent wasn't explosive. It was subtle, slow, private. Former Pastor Mark Colby recalled that Gregory once came to his office seeking help. He said he heard whispers during prayer. He asked if demons could use the voices of loved ones. Colby said he offered scripture and counseling, but Gregory never returned. "We all missed it," Colby admitted. "We mistook spiritual desperation for devotion." Emily Grace Lawson's autopsy confirmed the worst: death by asphyxiation. There were no signs of sexual abuse, no broken bones, no bruising beyond minor pressure marks on the arms. Consistent with being held down, she had been otherwise healthy. In her stomach, the medical examiner found traces of dried sage and honey, ingredients Lawson had likely forced her to consume as part of the ritual. The examiner noted the presence of several shallow cuts on her palms and feet, possibly part of an anointing process. None were life-threatening. Toxicology was clean. There were no drugs in her system. She suffered, the coroner's report read, but not for long. This was not prolonged torture. It was a controlled act with deliberate, ritualistic steps. The findings infuriated Emily's surviving relatives, especially her mother's sister, Caroline Miller. "He killed her in the name of salvation," she said at a press briefing. "That's not faith. That's murder. And we won't let that get twisted." The prosecution's path seemed straightforward: a confession, a body, and overwhelming evidence. But mental illness adds complexity. District Attorney Marcus Sloan laid out a two-pronged strategy. They would argue that Lawson was criminally responsible, that despite his beliefs, he knew what he was doing was wrong. In Texas, Sloan said, believing God told you to commit a crime doesn't mean you're not guilty. It just means you have to prove your mind was so impaired that you couldn't tell right from wrong. And that's a high bar. Meanwhile, the defense, led by court-appointed attorney Cheryl Danvers, prepared to pursue an insanity defense, citing Lawson's documented psychosis and lack of concealment. "This is a man who ran," Danvers said. "This is a man who showed the police his daughter's body and asked when she would come back." Before jury selection could begin, the psychiatric panel returned its final report. Gregory Lawson was not competent to stand trial. The judge ordered him committed to a state psychiatric facility indefinitely. Under Texas law, he would be reevaluated every 12 months to determine whether competency could be restored. The courtroom was filled with stunned silence. Emily's relatives broke down. Some called it a miscarriage of justice. Others quietly accepted the ruling, knowing that Gregory might never walk free again. "There's no winning here," DA Sloan admitted. "There's only aftermath." For Canyon County, that aftermath meant soul-searching. The town held a candlelight vigil for Emily on what would have been her 8th birthday. They lit candles outside the school, surrounding a mural where her classmates had drawn birds and stars. One child left a note: "You were kind to me. I miss you." Churches began offering mental health nights. A small nonprofit formed, Emily's Light Foundation, dedicated to helping rural families recognize early signs of psychological distress. The school district implemented a new policy. If a student has 5 unexcused absences, school counselors are required to make home contact within 48 hours. 10 days without any response? That now triggers an automatic welfare check. Small changes, but changes nonetheless. "I wish it weren't her story that made people act," said Counselor Rebecca Allen. "But if we save even one child by doing more, it means she didn't die for nothing." The Lawson farmhouse stands empty now after Gregory's commitment. The property went into foreclosure. Emily's belongings were boxed up by relatives, her sketchbooks, her stuffed animals, her backpack. Only the spare room remains untouched, sealed by police and filled with a silence even time hasn't broken. Some say they avoid driving past it. Others stop and leave flowers on the fence. No one has dared enter the room since the day deputies found Emily's body. And perhaps that's fitting, Because there are places grief lingers too deeply, rooms where faith was twisted into horror, and innocence was lost not to violence, but to delusion cloaked in the language of love. Emily Grace Lawson was buried beside her mother in a small cemetery overlooking the Texas plains. Her tombstone reads, "You were light in the shadows. May you forever be free." If you're captivated by real-life mysteries and chilling crime stories, don't forget to subscribe, like, and share. There's so much more to uncover, and you won't want to miss a single case.